Hey, everybody. I want to add a few things to the conversation we had last show about picking cycling shoes with the idea that at Leadville, most of us will have to do some walking.
Yeah. As a recap, if you want the lightest, stiffest shoe and plan to stay clipped in all day, you 20 people out there, then Shimano's gravel race shoe, the RX-8, definitely worth a look. But if you're like me and most of us, and you are going to be walking for part of the day, you still want something with race stiffness, then the S6E XC9 is what you want to grab.
That's right. Now, let's take this walking thing a step further. There I go with the puns again. If walking for you will involve more than just getting off at the top of Columbine and the lower section of Powerline, you likely want to dig deeper, again with the pun, into the Shimano shoe lineup. And the good news here is that your options get broader.
For instance, if you want a shoe that walks the walk, again with the puns here, then use Shimano's stiffness scale to help you. The RX-8 and the XC9 we mentioned are both at the upper end of that scale, 10 or above. For more flex, check out something that's more at a 7 or 8 on that stiffness scale. In that range, you're going to find the shoes like the XC5 and the RX-6.
Yeah, that RX-6, technically a gravel shoe, is a departure from the racier version in that it has a lot more protection built in for rock strikes, and it flexes more than the RX-8. You can check out the stiffness scale and the entire Shimano shoe lineup at bike.shimano.com, and thanks Shimano for being the title sponsor of this show.
3, 2, 1.
Leadville, the podcast for the 100-mile mountain bike race, presented by Shimano. Find them at bike.shimano.com. This is Season 6, Episode 13 of the show that breaks down, builds up, gets you ready, and freaks you out for the highest, hardest one-day mountain bike race in the country. I am Michael Houghton, hot to most.
I'm Fatty, and this episode features a real rock star in the world of sports nutrition. If there were a sports nutrition hall of fame, and there should be, our guest, Dr. Allen Lim, founder of Scratch Labs, would be a first ballot, no doubt.
That's right, Freddie. The man who developed the secret drink mix for pros and then Scratch Hydration has literally changed the way we think about eating and drinking during endurance events. And since nutrition is such an important part of having a successful day at Leadville, why not have a leader in the area come on and explain how to do it right? This will be one of 2 appearances by Dr. Lim, with this one focusing on the principles of nutrition. And then we'll have a follow-up that outlines a race day plan.
What is a good strategy for staying ahead of the cutoff times?
What do the experts say about sleeping effectively at altitude? And what do you each do?
For Leadville, hardtail or full suspension?
Yeah, good question.
Leadville frequently asked questions, LFAQs. For short, you ask, we answer. It's a simple format hosted by 2 simpletons.
What? Speak for yourself. This question also made for a great discussion on the participants page. Scott Peterson asked, do you guys know the most time a participant has shaved off between their first time doing the Leadville 100 and their second? I'm going to answer first, Hottie. You know me. I love to jump the line. I don't know the largest delta between, the universe's first and second finish, although I would love to know. Probably someone here has done some research. I will say the difference between my first and second finish was 52 minutes, but my second finish was 52 minutes slower than my first, finishing in my second time with an 11:27, which was my slowest finish ever out of 24 finishes. And I will say that the following year, I did better with a 9:13. So between my second and third, I did 2 hours and 14 minutes of improvement. Now, I finished between 9 and 10 hours for the next decade or so until 2011, my 15th start, when I finally figured out that this is an eating contest disguised as a race, and that changed things for me. I went from a 9:17 in 2010 to almost exactly an hour faster in 2011, giving me my first sub-9. But I think there is kind of a second question in Scott's question here. How much time does familiarity with the course earn you in your second year? All else being equal, which it rarely is. Of course, there's no way to distill it perfectly. No year is the same. No person is the same year to year. But I have heard people just kind of bandying about that the course knowledge, just having ridden it, buys you about half an hour. And I think for normal folks, for your 9 to 11 hour finisher, that's about right. What do you think, Hadi?
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say about the same thing. 25 minutes, 30 minutes, just by knowing the place, just by knowing where to turn, being confident, as you make the turn off the pavement onto the pipeline area, you know exactly where you're going. There's no hesitation at the pedals. You're just moving forward. Everything is right there for you, right? This is why you want to listen to the course, folks. If you're a first timer, then you've got it embedded in your head, at least somewhat. I wish we could put it on video for you, but there it is, right? So just knowing how everything flows is kind of say that's amazing too, to think that 30 minutes right there just by knowing stuff. And I'll have to say your year 1 to year 3 is still an hour and 15-minute improvement. That has got to rank up there, right, with some of the best that have ever done a first time to great time, I would think. So that's not a bad one. Ricky McDonald, the great Ricky McDonald, actually. By the way, folks, anybody who has not read this post should go there on the Facebook participants page, read it, read over the top. There's lots of encouragement there. Like especially if you're a second timer and you're hoping that, God, can I do better? I don't know. Go there and read what people have done. I think you'll be really encouraged. And for sure, check out what Ricky McDonald did. He went from 9:55 year 1 to 8:11.
Yeah.
In year 2. That's an hour and 44-minute improvement. I mean, that's amazing.
That is. I don't think he even changed the air in his tires between those 2 years either.
He probably added weight to his bike, because he added a doll or something, or a new bell or something up front.
Almost certainly.
For me, not as good as Ricky, but still I turned things around for the better. Year 1 was 9 hours, 21 minutes. And then my second ride, which was actually 2 years later, was 8:35. That's a 46-minute improvement.
That's significant.
Yeah, that's a good one, right? So I definitely got the 25 to 30 minutes just by knowing the place, and then picked another 15 minutes up somewhere, and I think I know where that was. And my why as to why I improved is an old story for regular listeners here. One, I started and had a solid goal. I knew the one and only time I wanted, not the 2 times I thought I could do in year 1. So I went out looking for gold or big buckle and big buckle only, which is great. I came in looking less like a Tour de France rider and more like a mountain biker. I mean, I was as skinny and scrawny as they get, as a 6'1" athlete can be in year 1, and really got rattled around all day on the Leadville course. And then 2 years later, I came back with a little more weight, a little more strength, and was able to survive the test better. And then, of course, how many times have I told this to these listeners? I don't know. What did I do? I turned up the speed on those stops. In other words, right, the feeds got quicker, thanks to Rebecca Rush for pointing out what should seem like an obvious thing, but needed to be drilled into my thick head. Like, you need to stop stopping so much.
Yeah.
Right?
Exact same story for Lisa as well, right? I mean, she had been a very solid 9.5 hour racer forever. And the year she rode it with Reba, she dropped an hour. And a lot of it is just by closing the little gaps in time that are otherwise there, pedaling when other people coast, rolling through the aid stations when other people stop. It is those little gaps in time that make a huge difference. You can pick up another half hour in addition to your course knowledge in your second time just by being a little bit more present and attacking the whole course. All right, speaking of axioms, which we talk about in the show a lot, just a second ago, I mentioned one that has made the big difference in my racing, that this is an eating contest disguised as a race. Here is another. You will not wear the same thing all day during this race.
Yeah, it's as true as anything can be in this race for every single racer. And the longer you're out there, the more weather you will see. At the very least, you're going to start the day cool to cold, and then it's going to warm up as you stop dropping and start climbing, and then it's going to get windy.
And then it's going to get hot, or it might get cold again. And it might get really sunny, or it might rain, it might hail, it might do everything all at once. It is high altitude. It's the summer in Colorado. You got to expect everything all the time.
Yeah, welcome to 10,000 feet. And how do you deal with the wide variety of temperature and weather? Of course, as our friend Josh Portner likes to say, in engineer speak, it depends. But there is one thing you're almost certain to want part of the day, and maybe for all of it, some good thermal arm warmers.
Yep. Start them every year with a pair of arm warmers from our sponsor, DNA. They make fantastic ones. They're warm, they're light, they grip nicely above your biceps without pinching, and they stay there, and they can be tugged down pretty easily to scrunch down around your wrist, then pull them back up as the day warms up, then cools down as it gets windy. Honestly, I don't remember the last time I started the race without a pair of those, and I will use them forever. I sometimes leave them on the whole year or the whole race, just moving them up and down as the day changes. They're honestly just essential riding equipment, regardless of whatever else you're wearing.
Yeah, I usually find them around your wrist as you pull into Twin Lakes alternate outbound. And sometimes you stick with them and sometimes they come off. But either way, they seem like a simple thing. But anyone who's had a bad set of arm warmers will agree a good set of arm warmers is something you will wear more than just about any other article of cycling clothing. And DNA's arm warmers are, in fact, great. Check them out along with the other gear for Leadville's ever-changing weather at dnacycling.com. I can't believe we are 13 episodes into the season and we have yet to do a show that focuses on nutrition. Well, that changes now.
Need I remind you that Leadville is an eating contest disguised as a mountain bike race? This is going to be the first of 2 episodes where we are taking a hard look at what is in your nutrition, what it does when it hits your gut, and how much we can handle over the course of 105 miles. We want to thank our friends at The Feed for helping us get a superstar in the world of sports hydration and fueling.
Well, Fatty, our next guest needs no introduction. You hear talk show hosts say that all the time. Our next guest needs no introduction. Well, that really is the case when you say the name Allen Lim. There is no need to remind our listeners who this man is, that he has a doctorate from applied exercise science from the University of Colorado, that he's worked with world tour teams as a sports scientist and coach, that he helped usher in the use of power meters and helped develop Power Tap. He was the inventor of the secret drink mix. He changed the way pro cyclists and hence the rest of us riders were fed. He's the man behind the homemade rice cakes wrapped in foil. That's our guest. He is the founder of Scratch Labs with world-renowned drink mixes and other nutrition products. And he is the author of 3 books that focus on food and nutrition for the endurance athlete. But like I said, Fatty, our guest needs no introduction. All you have to do is say the name Dr. Allen Lim, and people, especially people on 2 wheels, know exactly who he is and why they should listen. So, Dr. Allen Lim, thanks for joining the Leadville Trail 100 Mountain Bike Podcast, a very focused show. Hey, we see you at Leadville quite often. Is that a regular thing for you, going to Leadville?
Yeah, it has become a regular thing for me. It's just because I'm in Colorado, I'm in Boulder, and it's always just fun to go up there and camp out and, go to one of the feed stations and just support all the athletes there. It's a pretty special event. It's a ton of fun, and it's nice to be able to just kind of hang out and, be part of all that spirit and all of that fun.
Fantastic. Now, I have to say, Allen, that your intro, I think, is the single most fanboy intro I have ever heard Hadi give. So you may want to hire him to just sort of be the guy who intros you whenever you get on this.
Yeah, I need a hype man. What's funny about your intro, though, is that while I do think within the small niche of cycling, people know my name, people don't know what I look like. Right. And so when I'm at events, people are always like, hey, is Dr. Allen Lim here? And I'm like, oh, that guy's a dick. He's never here. Yeah. And I think that people don't know that I'm actually the 6th iteration of Dr. Allen Lim. The original is retired in Patagonia. I just find another Asian guy and just start calling him Dr. Lim for a while. And then pretty soon he takes over.
So sort of a Dread Pirate Roberts kind of thing going on. Yeah. Very Princess Bride.
Exactly. That's how otherwise, no one person has all this energy. It's impossible.
we're going to get into the weeds with you, but I want to start at sort of the baseline. A lot of our listeners, the people who are racing Leadville for the first or even the 15th time, getting nutrition can honestly be the fulcrum of the whole race. For 15 years, I struggled with getting a sub-9, never did it until I finally figured out the food. Help those listeners with a baseline. What should the Leadville racer be doing to feed themselves before the race and during the race?
Yeah, I think that there may be two very distinct approaches. One is a very scientific approach and one is a very hedonistic approach. You can just full on animal the event, right? And listen to every instinct that you have that wants to keep you alive, right? Which might be knocking down some competitor, stealing their food, and just hunger gaming the whole entire thing, right? The other approach is maybe more scientific, but they both are important. And the more scientific approach is to realize that it's not as complicated as it seems. And there are only three things that you're looking to get. You're looking to get carbohydrate, you're looking to get water, and you're looking to get salt or sodium, right? And if you can nail those three things down, then you're going to be set. The hard part is that it's difficult to predict on any given day what exactly you might need. You might be able to guess that you need to be in a certain range, but you still on race day have to rely on that animal, rely on that hedonistic urge to drink, to eat, etc., which means that carbohydrate, that water, that salt better be something that you really desire, right? Better be easy, better be logistically manageable, right? And where I see most people fail is not knowing that they need to have the right nutrition, hydration. They just screw up logistically, right? They don't plan far enough ahead. They don't have an overabundance for the worst case scenario, right? On a day like that, it's better to have too much than too little, right? And they don't actually practice that weekend routine enough, right? So that they have a familiarity in case things go a little sideways.
And I think that's what this episode is all about, or is how do we do this? And so let's talk about that. Starting with eating versus drinking, right? Is for a while the food in the pocket versus hydration in the bottle, that was kind of the thing. Is that still the way that we think?
Yeah, when I was on the world tour, that was ultimately what we evolved to. We evolved to a low calorie, simple sugar, electrolyte solution with a amount of sodium that matched what the athletes were losing in their sweat. That averages between 800 to 1,000 milligrams of sodium per liter. But there's a broad range. Some people lose way less. Some people lose way more. We'll get to that in a little bit. And then the notion was that to prevent GI distress, you would load up your stomach with solid food, and the stomach would act as a reservoir for that food. And as that food digested, you would slowly and consistently trickle in nutrients into the gut or the small intestine, or it would be absorbed. The problem in the past with high carbohydrate liquid solutions like gels or these highly concentrated drink mixes was that because they were already in liquid form, they didn't get held up in the stomach. You had a very high rate of emptying from the stomach. And all of a sudden, as these molecules kind of rushed into the small intestine and broke down very fast, you had a big traffic jam in the small intestine. Effectively, the rate of delivery exceeded the rate of absorption by the gut. And anytime you get a situation where you present more stuff in the gut than the gut can actually absorb at one given time, what ends up happening is that water then kind of reverses flow and enters the gut. You get this GI distress, some bloating in worst case scenario, some exercise associated diarrhea. And so we tried to meter the flow, effectively put a stoplight in front of the highway. And that stoplight in front of the highway was solid food, right? That being said, the carbohydrate technology has improved greatly over the last 10 years, a lot due to a company called Glyco that started back in 1905 on a mission to try to develop or produce muscle glycogen as a therapy for people with GI distress. This is a really interesting, crazy scientific history that led up to the development of these very, very complex carbohydrates around 2010 that didn't really become commercially available until more recently. And these carbohydrate structures digest more like real food. They don't break apart as fast as, say, maltodextrin. They're also very soluble. And so I think today it's possible to do both depending upon what you like, right? Some people still love real food and they love the taste and they love using that as a bit of reward. And it is super satisfying. You just need to be able to find the right amount of time to reach back in your pocket, open something up, chew, slow down, maybe at a feed zone, etc. Others, especially at a race like Leadville, will go completely liquid nutrition the whole entire time. I think both can work today, right? If you've got the right product set.
I was one of the early adopters, Dr. Lim, of the food in your pocket, hydration in your bottle strategy. Even though I never really experienced GI distress, I just thought the theory just made a lot of sense to me. Like, yeah, I don't want all that water flowing to my gut to try and deal with those sugar bombs. I just soon keep it in my blood, right, where it belongs, at least as much as possible, and let my stomach and the enzymes in my stomach regulate that flow of nutrients into the small intestine. It seemed to make a lot of sense. I used it with great success. The downside is wrappers and food, and you're trying to eat on a bumpy mountain bike. But my question here is this, though. Is there a difference between when you're eating in competition, like you're in a race? Is there a difference in strategy, at least as you see it, for the racer who's doing, say, a multi-day event, who is in a big block of training where they're riding day after day, and those folks who are just in it for one day, like Leadville, where you're all in for one day, you don't care how you feel the next day? Do you lay out the food plan any different for those two groups?
No, I think that it still comes down to whether or not you're going to be comfortable in that given session, right? Whether it's a training session or whether it's Leadville. I don't think that there is much difference. If you're not getting GI distress, that's ultimately the goal, right? And we don't want to do anything to kind of compromise your gut or cause any situations that might lead to, an exercise-associated diarrhea, et cetera, because those events are really, really hard to recover from. I think, besides the food, one other caveat to mention about GI distress is that it can also be caused by just overheating, right? The small intestine is very, very delicate. It's a very thin, small protective barrier that keeps the outside world from coming into the inside world. And when we overheat and we reach kind of a critical body temperature, that barrier can begin to break down. And so even if you have your nutrition strategy perfect, I see that in, heat stress situations, someone with heat exhaustion, et cetera, that gut wall can start to fail regardless. And so cooling and staying cool is another primary strategy to being able to get the right fuel and hydration.
And what have you observed about altitude and our ability to digest food and convert it to fuel?
Altitude is interesting because our sympathetic nervous system, our fight or flight nervous system gets really ramped up at altitude. And because of that, we primarily use carbohydrate at altitude. And so you do have to feed yourself more carbs when you're up at altitude because you're just burning through them. It's really, really hard to use fat. And so you might be well fat adapted, right? And you might have a plan where you think that you can rely on those endogenous fat stores for exercise. But if you're not very well adapted to altitude, meaning you haven't spent that month or month and a half up at altitude adapting, that fat adaptation acutely may change. And so you might find yourself at sea level being very well fat adapted, not too concerned about your carbohydrate intake for a 100-mile event. You get up to Leadville and all of a sudden your substrate utilization dramatically changes and you become highly reliant on carbohydrate. And if you don't have enough, you end up bonking and you don't know why.
So my altitude problem is a lot simpler than that, or at least it feels simpler to me when I'm racing the Leadville 100. And that is I am breathing at the absolute fastest I can breathe, especially as I get to 12,500 feet. And I've been climbing for 3,000 feet straight. and I am just breathing so fast, it is hard to eat because I am breathing so fast, getting something into my mouth, chewing it, and then swallowing it in, while I am still, I can't breathe through my nose at that speed, right? Or at that, at that level. It is just hard to do. So just at that very practical, normal person type of feeding. Plus, it is hard for me to ride one-handed for that long, frankly, when I am, at my limit like that. What does a normal person like me, like a lot of the people who race this race, what do we do when we when we want to eat, right? We are sick of sweet drinks. We are sick of gels or whatever we are using. How do you eat at that altitude, at that effort?
Yeah. So what you explained is something that a lot of marathon runners have lamented about. They are running so all out for that, 2.5 hour, whatever, time they're going for, that they can't actually consume much, right? They're just breathing way too hard. Gwen Jorgensen, when she was training for the marathon, she was the gold medalist in 2016 in the triathlon. She had this problem. And this is when we actually developed our super high carb formula for her that was built on a carbohydrate called highly branched cyclic dextrin. This is when things started changing for me from the, kind of hydration in the bottle, fuel in the pocket type of strategy. And we began to realize that if the carbohydrate was complex enough and still soluble, that you could actually just drink all of your carbohydrate. And so in that situation where you're ventilating so hard that you can't eat and you don't want to take your hands off the bars, making sure that you have, say, a Camelback, right? And that Camelback actually has a high concentration of carbohydrate. We have found with highly branched cyclic dextrin, we recommend that you don't go higher than 20% concentration. So that would be 20 grams per every 100 mils. So if you knew you had a, 1,000-liter bottle or Camelback, you'd multiply that by 0.2, which would give you 200. You know that you can put 200 grams of carbohydrate in that. I have actually found experimenting with athletes that some athletes can go as high as a 40% carbohydrate solution with highly branched cyclic dextrin. So, you can get a lot of freaking carbohydrate. And for most athletes at Leadville who are, say, doing, maybe 700 calories an hour or so, and the goal would probably be to replace half of those calories an hour, or 350, maybe at most 400, you're looking at between 60 to 100 grams of carbohydrate an hour. And so in a 1 liter Camelback, you might be able to get in at least, 40 grams or so. You might be able to get in at least 200 grams of carbohydrate. That could get you through, 2 to 3 hours. And depending on your feed zones, you end up switching out those Camelbacks with that fuel. And then you can put a lighter hydration solution, something not as concentrated in your bottles. The cluster dextrin is not sweet at all. It's almost tasteless. Some people have a hard time distinguishing it from plain water. So that ultimately is been my go-to for that situation where you just can't eat. We lean onto the liquid side, but we use the right carbohydrate and we avoid maltodextrin. To give you a comparison, maltodextrin might be anywhere from 3 to 15 glucose molecules linked together in a chain. So each glucose molecule or each simple sugar is like a Lego, right? And you're basically linking these Legos in a straight chain. There's only one link you need to break to get the glucose molecules. You can only transport carbohydrate across the small intestine as a single Lego or as a single glucose molecule or single fructose molecule. In comparison, highly branched cyclic dextrin or cluster dextrin is anywhere from 60 to 100 glucose molecules linked together in one big molecule. And these Legos basically, once in their gut, they break off one at a time. What's interesting about gut rot is that it's not the size of the molecule in your gut that causes the change in the water flow across the small intestine. It's the number of molecules. It's the number of Lego pieces. But if you can put all those Lego pieces together in one big molecule, they act as one piece, right? And so we can put in a lot of calories, and as long as we can kind of slow that breakdown a bit, then we're safe. And that's why these new very complex carbohydrate structures are great. And this is where, I just tell athletes, hey, just don't use maltodextrin, and you're probably going to be okay on the liquid side.
Hey, Fatty, I think that every once in a while, it is a good idea to switch food, gear, or equipment up. You learn something new and sometimes find something better. For example, this past weekend, I changed grips because I was curious. Is there a better grip out there? And maybe I found one. It's a good time to check now, and they can always come off if I don't like them.
That's right. I think we are going to talk about grips sometime very soon. Lots to say there. But in my case, I will sometimes make that switch to discover that what I had is better. And when that happens, you find out how much better you had it before you switched. And that is what happened with me recently when I came back to my M5 wheels. And I've been switching wheels up a little bit, which has been interesting because it gave me an opportunity to discover how much better M5 wheels are than anything else I've ridden out there. There are subtle differences, but they are important. These are honestly the perfect wheel for someone who takes the Leadville 100 seriously.
Envy's own ranking of what applications each of their wheels are for really bears out. It's a big help here. So follow this ranking system. Descending, 6 out of 10. Climbing, 10 out of 10. Impact toughness, 5 out of 10. Compliance, 8 out of 10. Now, that's a ranking system there for the fatty wheel, the M5.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, obviously, no wheel could be assessed as perfect for every condition. There's nothing that's perfect at everything. But if you were going to bias what a wheel is good at for Leadville, those are the numbers you would want to hit. 10 out of 10 for climbing, springy and lively for the choppy dirt roads, tough enough for anything Leadville's going to throw at it. You don't need enduro wheels for this race. Seriously, the Envy N5, after you've tried other wheels, give them a try. You're going to see why we love them.
Check out Envy's wheels and other carbon components at Envy. That's ENVE.com. We are learning a lot from Dr. Allen Lim about the kinds of carbohydrates we should be taking in and in what form. But a huge question for all of us is, how much can I take in over the course of an hour? Yeah, we've heard some pretty incredible stories, Dr. Lim, recently about athletes' capacity to bring in carbohydrates. They're almost carb cramming, if you will, in training. We heard, I think last year, of athletes shooting for, especially in the Lifetime Grand Prix, shooting for like 120 grams of carbohydrates per hour. That works out, I think, about 480 calories per hour. What are the upper limits, do you think, for carb intake per hour, especially as it pertains to maybe the amateur athlete?
Yeah, 120 grams, that's matching an energy expenditure where somebody is doing about 1,000 to 1,100 calories an hour. And you have to be able to win a Leadville or in the top 10 of Leadville in order to need that much energy, right? And so I do think that what's interesting is that things are in proportion. The same physiology that might allow you to just go that fast on a bicycle also probably is met by the ability to absorb that much carbohydrate, right? So they kind of go hand in hand. And in some situations, you might find an athlete with a big engine, but low intake ability, right? And that's when they might get screwed and might be better suited for shorter, faster events. For most individuals doing Leadville, you're going to be anywhere from 400 to maybe 700 calories an hour. And the rule of thumb is replace half the calories an hour, right? And so if you're replacing half the calories you burn per hour, you are at effectively your upper limit for absorption, right? And there's no need to try to overdo that. So you might find someone who is doing, 500 calories an hour, only needing to consume about 50 grams of carbohydrate an hour, right? And that's a lot of carbohydrate.
Does it make a difference if I'm a larger individual or smaller individual?
It does. Your energy expenditure is going to be proportional to size. And so bigger people are going to be burning more calories just because of that bigger mass, bigger size. The best way to get an estimate of your energy expenditure for a day like Leadville is to have a power meter, right? And to know that a power meter measures mechanical work. And by this little quirk of nature, 1,000 kilojoules of mechanical work is about 1,000 calories of energy burned, right? It actually is more like 1,100 calories of energy burned for most human beings. That's because our bodies are only about 25% gross mechanically efficient. So if we consume 1,000 calories, only about 250 actually goes into producing power on the bicycle. But by another quirk of nature, the conversion of kilojoules to kcals is only 4-1. So they cancel each other out. So if you have a power meter and you know what your pace is, then you'll have a good idea of how much energy you're burning. If you end up knowing that you're going to do 4,000 kilojoules of work at Leadville, your goal is to get at least 2,000 calories in for that day, spread across however many of hours you're going to be doing.
Is there a way to train my body up so that I can bring in more calories and therefore hopefully have, I guess, more fuel available to my engine? Or is that something where essentially the more power you put out, the more energy you can take in? The way to bring in more calories is to become basically to improve the size of your engine, so to speak.
I think you can, but what you're really doing is you're still reliant on a big cardiac output. You're still reliant on blood flow. You've got to get consistent blood flow into your small intestine in order to increase absorption of nutrients. And the thing is that there's this major competition for blood flow during exercise, right? You've got to use blood flow to not only deliver oxygen to working muscle, but you've got to use that blood to remove CO2, to remove excess heat by bringing blood to vessels in your back and to your skin so that you can actually cool off by sweating. You're losing blood because of sweat. And now you've got to also bring blood to your gut in order to absorb things. What that all means is that the compromise ends up being pace, right? You've got to find the pace that you can keep up for that whole duration that optimizes for all of those 4 different things, right? Removal of CO2, delivery of oxygen, removal of heat, and, bringing in nutrients in the small intestine. So I think the biggest mistake people also make in an event like Leadville is if you go out way too hard, or if you pick a pace that is simply too hard, it's not going to matter because you're going to be intaking all this carbohydrate and you may not be able to absorb it if you're going too hard. And so even the best athletes there who are out to win the event know that they still need to be riding in that kind of sub-threshold pace, that pace where they probably can't sing, but they can probably still talk.
I've made that mistake. I think a lot of us have made that mistake. It is so easy to do. You drift downhill for a few miles, then you hit St. Kevin's, and you're full of adrenaline and enthusiasm, and you go harder than you should have. You dig yourself into that hole, and you're aware of it. How do you fix it?
You have to recover, right? And you have to give yourself some time to recover. Part of that recovery is cooling off, right? So that your temperature doesn't rise to a critical point. What I've seen in performances is that someone could be going really, really well. And once they hit this critical temperature, it's probably like in the 39.5 degrees Celsius range, their brain just kind of shuts everything off, right? And there's an aspect of physiology called catastrophe theory where the idea is that you reach a certain critical point where your brain thinks that you're hurting itself and it's going to shut you off. And once your brain says no more, then no more, right? So you do have to just relax for a little bit. You do have to recover for a bit. You do have to make sure your temperature comes down for a little bit. And then you just have to kind of reset and restart. right? And take your time and slowly bring up that intensity and that pace again. So having some idea of pacing strategy and taking your time and being patient is a big part of that endurance game at Leadville.
When you go to the Leadville Trail 100, Dr. Lim, you find gel wrappers all over the course, all over the place. I stuff Fatty's pockets. I'm his feeder, by the way, full of gels. I take old gel wrappers out, stuff his pockets with new gels. I've heard athletes in the Lifetime Grand Prix going through 30 gels in a race per day. Some pretty crazy numbers. But if you go to the Scratch website, there are no gels. There's chews. There's a calorie-dense drink mix called Super Fuel, but no gels. So what are your thoughts on gels?
Yeah, I think the distinction between our Super Fuel and the gels is just that the gels already come prepackaged. So what we tend to do is we give athletes these little 150 mil little flasks, and we will put in about a 30% concentration of the super high carb. So, 150 times 0.3, it's like, we get in like about 40, 50 grams of carbohydrate in each one. If we know that an athlete's on pace to, do 9 to 10 hours at 50 grams per hour, they're effectively, if they were going to fuel with these little soft flasks, we know that they probably need about 10 of these. And so they might start with 4 of these in the pocket, and then they'll pick up, 3 to 4 more at each feed zone and be A-okay. So it ends up being pretty simple if you can get the right amount of carbohydrate. And we like these flasks because they're just a little bigger. You can get a little more carbohydrate. They're a little less wasteful than tearing up a bunch of gels. And the super high carb ends up not being sweet. So it ends up being a little more sustainable, and it keeps things very simple. So I think that, most gels are about 20 grams of carbohydrate. And so it's very conceivable that if someone was just using gels as a fuel source, that over 10 hours that they're going to be going through about 20 to 25 of them. Right. And so being able to just go through, say, 10 of these flasks that fit in the pocket pretty well ends up simplifying things. But that's just one strategy, right? You can also turn your Camelback into kind of a big, high concentrated carbohydrate solution as well with the super high carb formula.
As far as gels go, it's what we're trying to avoid there is just the sugar fatigue, right? I mean, that's its big bugaboo is what it does to the palate and our ability to keep taking that in.
Well, I think that most gels are not that complex. Most of them are made with either maltodextrin or just plain sugar. The issue ends up becoming if you take too many at one time. Again, since this stuff is already liquefied, it doesn't sit in the stomach too long, and it can rush into the small intestine fairly fast. If you are kind of metering that gel on your own and you are the one acting as that stoplight and policing things and trickling it in, I think that you can be okay. But I think that you get in a problem if you try to take too much at one time. And so another important strategy for Leadville is if you are using really sweet gels, you have to meter out your dosage, right? You can't get into a panic and think that by taking in a bunch at one time that you're going to save yourself, right? At that point, you might be doing more harm than good.
Right. So give us an example of metering. If I were on gels and that was my fuel, how do I meter?
You want to think about it in terms of your carbohydrate need per hour. And let's just say that that's, 60 grams an hour. Well, that might be 2 gels and 1 water bottle, right? With sports drink in it. And as long as you're consistently getting in those 2 every hour with that 1 water bottle, even if you feel good, that's way better than getting 4 or 5 hours in, realizing that you're bonking, and then trying to take in a bunch of, carbohydrate at one time to make up that difference. You won't be able to make up that difference. You'll probably just be causing a situation that you might get GI distress.
What you're describing is exactly what I learned over trial and error over 15 years. I mean, you and I should have talked a long time ago about this, but no, on my Garmin, I have it set so there's a food chime. It goes off every 20 minutes. That is my signal for 100 calories. What you're describing is actually super interesting. I would love to talk with you more. I can be taught. I am slow, but I can be taught. So it's, I'm a guy. I'm racing I've done this race a million times. My wife also has done this race. She's closing in on 20 times. We have to eat a little, she eats a little bit less. She eats a little bit different. What is the difference between men and women and how we ought to prep for and consume during the Leadville 100?
Yeah, I think that there's probably more difference between, the fastest women versus the slowest women than there is a difference between the average woman and the average man at Leadville, right? The within differences may actually be much greater than the between differences, right? And the nature of that is it really comes down to fitness level is probably more of a determinant of what you actually need to consume than any other variable. And so if you were to kind of blind yourself of gender between yourself and your wife, and you start thinking about, well, what are the pace and the fitness and the power differences between the two of us, that would explain most of the nutritional differences you need on that particular day, right? There are always individual differences, even within gender, that are more profound than the differences that you might be able to assume between, say, men and women when it comes to that acute fueling day. Now, obviously, if you were to think about nutrition very holistically, big picture, in terms of stage in life and, a woman's menstrual cycle versus a man, you might find some important differences in nutrition that need to be accounted for. But on that given race day, on that single day, most of it is going to come down to pace and fitness.
Thanks again to Dr. Lim. And again, we'll have more with Allen Lim in a future episode when Allen Lim will walk us through a race day fueling plan for Leadville. And we also discuss cooking for ourselves with Dr. Lim, how to act like a pro in the kitchen. Good stuff.
We want to thank The Feed for sponsoring this segment and for putting us in contact with Dr. Lim. The Scratch Lab Super Fuel that Dr. Lim referenced is, of course, available at The Feed, along with all Scratch products. The Feed is a sponsor of this and every episode of the Leadville 100 podcast. As a listener, you can get a great discount. Claim your $80 annual credit at thefeed.com/Leadville. Register your email, verify your phone number, and then spend your first Feed credit of $20 right away. Let's go ahead and wrap this episode. Hottie is on Instagram. He's at Michael Houghton. I'm at Eldon Nelson. I think I posted there a couple of times last year. I don't know. But I am on the Facebook Leadville 100 mountain bike page. And if you want to have a conversation, you can find me almost ridiculously often on our Slack channel. You're going to find a link to it over on leadville.fm/Slack.
If you like the show, go to wherever you listen and give us a 5-star rating, and please write a review. And to see all the ways you can find the show, it's leadville.fm. Now, good luck in your riding, racing, and recovery. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you at the start line.